Welcome back, everybody. Ready for another deep dive?
Absolutely. Always ready to explore the intricacies of language.
You know, I love a good verb, right? But some of those English verbs, they just love to play tricks on us.
Oh, for sure. They sound similar, but their meanings, totally different worlds.
It's like they're trying to test us, see if we're really paying attention. And you know what? Sometimes they win.
Even native speakers stumble on these, trust me.
It's true. It's true. So that's why we're doing this deep dive, tackling some of those confusing English verbs.
Gotta stay sharp, keep our language game strong.
Exactly. And we've got a great resource to guide us. Remember that awesome online lesson you sent about 21 tricky verbs?
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. Lots of great examples and explanations.
We're going to break down those verbs, give you some tips for remembering the differences, and maybe even uncover some of the history behind them.
A little language archaeology, always fun.
So, buckle up, word nerds. Let's get this deep dive started. And where better to begin than with the classic pair that causes endless headaches? Lay versus lie.
Ah, yes, the notorious lay and lie, always tripping people up.
The online lesson lays out the basics, but I feel like there's always more to uncover with these two. What do you think?
Well, one thing that's really interesting is how their meanings have actually shifted over time. You know, way back when lay used to be used for both putting something down and reclining.
Wait, seriously? So like, I'm going to lay down for a nap would have been grammatically correct back then.
Exactly. Imagine the confusion.
Whoa, my mind is blown. It's like the English language had a mischievous streak even way back then.
It definitely keeps things interesting. But for the sake of clarity today, we have to stick to the modern rules. Lay means to put something down, like lay the phone on the table, and lie means to recline, like lie down and take a nap.
Right. But the fun really starts when we get to the past tenses. Yesterday, I laid the phone on the table, but yesterday, I lay down for a nap.
The past tense of lie becomes lay. It's almost as if the language is playing a game with us, right?
It's definitely testing our memory skills. Okay, let's move on to another tricky pair. Raise and rise.
These two are all about direction, about things going up.
I always think of raising my hand in class versus the sun rising in the morning. Does that kind of capture the difference?
Perfect examples. Raise always needs an object. You raise your hand, you raise a flag, you raise a question. It's a transitive verb, meaning it needs something to act upon.
Okay, so raise is like the verb of action. You're actively lifting something up.
Exactly. While rise, on the other hand, is all about things going up on their own. It's intransitive, no object needed. Bread dough rises, the tide rises, hope rises.
So rise is about things ascending naturally without any external force.
You got it. But of course, there are always tricky situations, like what about stock prices? Do they rise or are they raised?
That's a good one. Technically, they rise on their own based on market forces, right? But people do say things like the company raised its prices, even though it's not grammatically correct.
Exactly. It's a subtle way of implying that the company has control over the price increase, even if it's technically dictated by the market.
Fascinating. It's like we're bending the rules of grammar to emphasize a certain point, to add a layer of meaning.
Absolutely. It shows how language is constantly evolving, responding to the ways we use it and the ideas we want to express.
All right, time for another verb showdown. Borrow and lend. We all know the basic idea. You borrow from someone, you lend to someone. But it's easy to get them mixed up in conversation.
Especially when you're in a hurry or not paying close attention.
Exactly. The lesson had a simple tip for keeping them straight. Think about the direction. You borrow from someone and lend to someone.
Ah, yes, that from and to distinction. Helpful little trick.
But beyond the grammar, there's something really interesting about the social dynamics of borrowing and lending. Have you ever thought about that?
Oh, absolutely. When you lend something, you're placing trust in the other person. It's more than just a transaction. It's a sign of your relationship.
You're expecting them to take care of your item and return it in good condition and on time.
Right. It's like an unspoken agreement, a mini social contract.
Oh, that reminds me of a time when I lent a book to a friend and they totally forgot about it. It was a signed copy, a real treasure. And I never saw it again.
Ouch, that's rough. I can see how that would strain a friendship.
It definitely did. It taught me a valuable lesson about lending out precious things.
We've all been there. But it really highlights how these simple verbs, borrow and lend, can have a surprising impact on our relationships.
Absolutely. It's not just about grammar. It's about navigating social expectations and those unspoken bonds of trust. Okay, ready for the next verb challenge?
Bring it on.
Let's tackle accept versus accept. They sound so similar, but their meanings are worlds apart.
Like night and day, the key is remembering that accept is about inclusion, taking something in. It's an action, like opening your arms to receive something.
Okay, so accept is like saying, yes, I'll take that.
Exactly. While accept is all about exclusion, leaving something out. It's about creating a boundary or making a distinction.
So like, I like all fruits except for bananas. I'm drawing a line in the sand.
Perfect example. You're accepting all the other fruits but excluding bananas.
And you know what's helpful? That little X at the beginning of accept. Yeah. Like visually crossing something out, excluding it from the group.
Those little visual cues can be lifesavers, especially when you're dealing with words that sound so similar.
All right, ready to face the ultimate verb nemesis.
Let's do it. Bring on the challenge.
Affect versus affect. Even experienced writers get tripped up by these two.
No shame in admitting that. They're notorious for causing confusion.
The lesson we're using breaks it down pretty well, but I always need a refresher.
Well, the simplest way to think about it is affect is usually a verb and affect is usually a noun.
Okay, that's a good starting point. So affect means to influence something, like the weather can affect your mood.
Exactly. And affect is the result or consequence of something, like the effect of the storm was devastating.
But then there's that sneaky little twist. Affect can also be a verb, right?
You're right, it can, but it's used in a very specific way, meaning to bring about or to cause, like the new policy will affect positive change. It's a bit more formal.
So it's like defect, the verb is reserved for those times when you really want to emphasize the power of something to create change.
Precisely. It's all about intentionality, choosing the right word to convey the precise shade of meaning you have in mind.
Okay, I think I'm starting to get a handle on those two. Maybe. We'll see how I do in the real world.
Practice makes perfect.
Speaking of practice, let's move on to a pair that's all about reading between the lines. Infer and imply. They both deal with unspoken meanings, but how do we tell them apart?
Well, think about it this way. Imply is what the speaker does, and infer is what the listener does.
Okay, I like that. So if I say, wow, it's getting late, I might be implying that I want to leave, even though I haven't explicitly said it.
Exactly. And your listener might infer from your tone of voice and the context that you're ready to head home.
It's like a subtle dance of communication, where we're sending and receiving signals without always saying things directly.
Precisely. And this is where things can get tricky, because misunderstandings happen all the time. Someone might infer something different from what you intended to imply.
Oh, for sure. We've all been in those situations where someone took our words the wrong way, even though we thought we were being clear. It's a good reminder that communication is a two-way street.
Absolutely. We have to be mindful of both what we're saying and how it might be interpreted by others.
Okay, ready for another round? I'm feeling like a verb warrior.
Let's keep this momentum going. How about assure, ensure, and insure?
Oh man, those three always get me. They sound so similar, and I can never remember which one to use when.
It's understandable. They have very subtle but important distinctions.
The online lesson gave some helpful examples, but I still need a little extra clarification.
Well, think of assure as primarily about calming someone's worries. Like, you might assure a friend that everything will be okay, or assure a client that their project is on track.
Okay, so assure is all about the emotional aspect, making someone feel confident and secure.
Exactly. Ensure, on the other hand, is about guaranteeing an outcome, making sure something happens. You might ensure that a project is completed on time by setting deadlines and following up regularly.
So assure is about calming nerves, while insure is about taking action to make something certain. And where does insure fit into all of this?
Insure is a bit different. It's specifically about financial protection. You might insure your car against accidents or insure your home against damage.
Oh, right. It's about minimizing risk and protecting yourself financially. Okay, I think I'm starting to get it.
It takes practice, but once you grasp the nuances, you'll be able to use these verbs with confidence.
Speaking of confidence, let's tackle a pair that often gets confused because the spelling is so similar. Lose and loose. The lesson mentioned a tip about the number of OS.
Right. Lose with one O is about being defeated or misplacing something. You might lose your keys, lose a game, or even lose your train of thought.
And loose with two O's means something isn't tight or restrained, like loose clothing or a loose tooth.
Exactly. And it's interesting how those spellings reflect the word's origins. Lose comes from an Old English word meaning to destroy, while loose comes from an Old Norse word meaning to loosen.
Wow, I love those little language history tidbits. It's like uncovering the secrets behind the words we use every day.
It's fascinating, isn't it? Language is like a living tapestry woven together from threads of history, culture, and human experience.
All right, let's move on to a pair that can be tricky in formal situations. Refuse and decline. I know the lesson mentioned that there's a difference in politeness, but I'm curious to hear your take on it.
Well, refuse is definitely more direct, maybe even a little blunt. It can come across as forceful or even confrontational. You might refuse a request outright if it's completely unacceptable, or refuse to participate in something you strongly disagree with.
So refuse is like a hard no, a firm rejection.
Exactly. While decline is a softer, more diplomatic way of saying no. It suggests that you're considering the request, but ultimately choosing not to comply.
So I might decline an invitation politely, explaining that I have a prior commitment, or decline a job offer if it doesn't align with my career goals.
Precisely. And it's interesting to consider how cultural norms can influence the choice between these verbs. In some cultures, directness is valued, while in others, it's considered rude.
That's a great point. What might be considered polite in one context could be seen as abrupt or even offensive in another. It's like language reflects the social rules and expectations of a particular community.
Absolutely. Effective communication requires not only grammatical accuracy, but also cultural sensitivity.
Okay, 2 more pairs to go. What's next on our verb agenda?
How about bring and take? These two often get mixed up, especially when we're talking about moving things from one place to another.
Oh, yes. I always have to stop and think about which one to use. I know it has something to do with direction.
Yeah. You got it. Bring implies movement towards the speaker, while take implies movement away from the speaker.
So if I'm at home and I say, bring me that book, I'm asking for the book to be brought to me, to my location.
Exactly. But if you're at the library and you say, take this book back, you're talking about moving the book away from your location.
Okay, so it all depends on the perspective of the speaker. It's all about where the object is going in relation to the person speaking.
You've got it. Bring it here. Take it there. It's a simple but effective way to remember the distinction.
All right, last pair for this part of our deep dive. Let's finish strong with remember and remind.
Ah, yes, the verbs of memory. These two can be tricky because they both involve recalling something from the past.
The lesson talked about the difference between internal and external cues. Can you elaborate on it a bit?
Sure. Remember is the internal act of retrieving information from your own memory, like accessing a file in your mental archive. It's all about what's going on inside your head.
So I might remember a childhood vacation without any external help. It's like those memories are stored somewhere deep inside my brain, waiting to be accessed.
Exactly. But sometimes we need a little help to jog our memory, which is where remind comes in.
Remind involves an external prompt, right? Like a note on the fridge or someone mentioning something that triggers a memory.
Precisely. You might set a reminder on your phone to call someone or be reminded of a past event by a certain song or smell. Like, remind provides that extra nudge to help us access those stored memories.
Okay, that makes sense. So remember is about internal recall, and remind is about external prompts. It's like we have these internal memory banks, but sometimes we need a little help to open the vault.
It's a fascinating interplay between our internal world and the external stimuli that shape our memories. All right, let's dive back into those tricky verbs. Ready for more?
Oh yeah, bring it on. I'm feeling like a verb warrior now.
Excellent. That's the spirit. So what do you say we tackle, see, watch, and look next?
Ooh, those are interesting. They all deal with vision, but I bet there are some subtle differences.
Definitely. Think of see as the most general one, simply registering something with your eyes. It can be unintentional, like when you see a bird fly by while you're reading.
So see is just about taking in the visual information without really processing it, kind of like passive observation.
Exactly. But when you watch something, you're deliberately focusing on it, paying attention to what's happening, like watching a movie or watching a sporting event.
Watch is more about being present in the moment, really engaging with what you're seeing.
Right. And then there's look, which is about intentionally directing your gaze towards something specific, like looking at a painting or looking for your keys.
So look is all about purpose and intention, like saying, I'm choosing to focus my attention on this particular thing.
Precisely. And it's amazing how these three simple verbs reflect different levels of engagement with the world around us. What we see, what we watch, what we look at, it all shapes our perception of reality.
That's deep. It's like we're constantly filtering the massive amount of visual information that bombards us every second, choosing what to focus on, what to ignore.
Absolutely. And speaking of focusing on something specific, let's talk about learn and teach.
Ah, yes, the dynamic duo of education. The lesson emphasized their opposite roles, acquiring knowledge versus imparting it.
Right. But I think it's also important to see how they're interconnected, how they feed into each other.
I like that. So learn is about expanding your understanding, taking in new information, and making connections.
Exactly. It can happen through reading, through experience, through interactions with others. It's a lifelong process.
And teach is about sharing what you've learned, guiding others on their own learning journeys.
So precisely. And you know what's fascinating? When you teach something, you often learn it even better yourself.
Oh, absolutely. It's like having to explain something to someone else forces you to really think it through, to understand it on a deeper level.
It's like the saying goes, when one teaches, one learns twice. So true.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit and tackle a pair that often gets misused, even by native speakers. Rise and arouse.
Oh, yes. These two can be tricky. They both have something to do with upward movement, but in very different ways.
I remember the lesson mentioning a distinction between physical and emotional or psychological movement.
Right. Rise is primarily about physical movement, something literally going up. The sun rises, bread dough rises, a building rises.
Rise is about defying gravity, moving upwards in a tangible way.
Exactly. While arouse is more about stirring emotions, feelings, or even physical sensations. It's about awakening something that was previously dormant.
So arouse is less about literal movement and more about activating something within a person, like sparking an interest or triggering a reaction.
That's a great way to put it. It's about evoking a response, creating a shift in energy or emotion.
It's like rise is about things going up, and arouse is about feelings or sensations going up, becoming more intense.
Precisely. And that distinction can really make a difference in how you use these verbs, especially in writing.
All right, 2 more verbs down. We're making progress.
We're on a roll. Shall we continue our exploration?
Absolutely. Let's keep this verb train moving.
All right, next stop. Advice and advice. Another pair that sounds almost identical, that has different grammatical roles.
Ah, yes, the classic noun versus verb dilemma. I remember learning this rule back in school, but it never quite stuck.
It's one of those rules that can be tricky to remember, but the key is to think about advice as the actual information or guidance being given. It's something tangible, something you can offer or receive.
So like, I need some advice on what to wear to the party, or my dad always gives me good advice.
Perfect examples. Advice is the noun, the thing itself.
And advise is the verb, the action of giving that advice.
Exactly. So you might say, the doctor advised me to rest, or I would advise you to be cautious in this situation.
Okay, that makes sense. It's like advice is the gift, and advise is the act of giving the gift.
I like that analogy. It really captures the difference.
Right, feeling more confident about those two. What's next on our verb adventure?
How about altogether and altogether? These two often get confused because they sound so similar.
Oh, yes. I've definitely mixed those up before. They both seem to have something to do with being together, but I'm not sure about the specifics.
Well, altogether simply means everyone or everything in one place. Like, we were all together for the holidays, or the kids gathered all the toys together.
So all together emphasizes unity, being in a group or a collection.
Exactly. It's about togetherness. Altogether, on the other hand, means completely or entirely. You might say, that's an altogether different matter, or I'm altogether too exhausted to go out tonight.
Altogether is more about intensity or completeness, taking something to its absolute limit.
Precisely. And while the meanings are distinct, sometimes you can use either phrase depending on the emphasis you want to create.
Interesting. So it's like choosing between different shades of the same color, adding a subtle layer of meaning to your sentence.
Exactly. It's all about being aware of those nuances and choosing the words that best convey your intent.
Okay, on to the next verb pair. How about among and between?
Ah, yes. The prepositional pair that often causes confusion. I know people learn the rule about using between for 2 things and among for more than 2, but it's not always that straightforward.
Yeah, I've heard that rule, but it doesn't always seem to apply in real life.
Right. The real distinction lies in the relationship between the things being referred to.
Okay, so it's not just about the quantity, but also about the quality of the connection.
Exactly. Among is used when the relationship is more general, less defined, like being part of a larger group or being surrounded by something.
Among is about being immersed in a larger context, being part of a whole.
Right. While between is used when the relationship is more specific, more defined. It often involves a clear distinction or separation between the things being referred to.
So, like, the secret was shared between the two friends, but the conversation flowed easily among the guests.
Perfect examples. The tween creates a more direct one-to-one connection, while among is about being in the midst of a group or a collection.
Okay, I'm starting to see the light. It's about understanding the nature of the relationship, not just counting the number of things involved.
Exactly. It's about paying attention to those subtle nuances that can make a big difference in meaning.
All right, we're in the home stretch now. Only 2 verb pairs left to tackle.
We're almost there. Shall we conquer beside and besides next?
Yes, let's do it. Those 2 always trip me up. They look and sound so similar, but I can never remember which one is which.
Well, the easy way to remember is that beside is strictly about physical location. It means next to or at the side of something.
So, like, the cat sat beside the fireplace, or he stood beside his best friend?
Precisely. It's all about physical proximity. While besides has a broader meaning, it can mean in addition to or apart from.
Okay, so besides is more about adding something extra, expanding the scope of the conversation.
Exactly, like saying, and there's more. Or let's consider other factors.
I think I can remember that. Beside for location, besides for additional information.
You got it. Simple but effective.
All right, ready for the final verb showdown? I'm feeling like a verb champion at this point.
Excellent. Let's end our exploration with a pair that's all about permission and possibility. Can and may.
Ah, yes, the classic verbs of elementary school grammar lessons. I remember being told that may is more polite than can, but I'm not sure I ever understood the real difference.
Well, the politeness distinction is part of it, but there's also a difference in meaning. Can is about ability or possibility. It's about whether something is physically or logically possible.
So can is about what you're capable of doing or what's within the realm of possibility. Like I can swim or it can snow in July.
Exactly. May, on the other hand, is about permission or likelihood. It's about whether something is allowed or whether it's likely to happen.
So may is about getting the green light or making a prediction about the future, like, may I borrow your pen? Or it may rain later today.
Precisely. And while can and may are often used interchangeably in casual conversation, it's important to distinguish between them in formal situations or when you want to be extra polite.
So like when you're asking your boss for a raise, you'd probably want to say, may I speak to you for a moment? Rather than, can I speak to you for a moment?
Exactly. It shows that you're respecting their authority and following proper etiquette.
Okay, I think I finally mastered the can versus may conundrum. What a satisfying feeling.
And a well-deserved victory.
All right, time to tackle those last 6 verb pairs. Ready to finish strong.
Absolutely. Let's do this.
Okay, first up, speak and talk. I feel like these 2 are often used interchangeably, but I'm guessing there's a more nuanced distinction.
You're right. There is a subtle difference, primarily in the level of formality.
Okay, so when would you use speak instead of talk?
Speak tends to be more formal, often used in contexts where one person is addressing a group or delivering a prepared message, like giving a speech or a presentation.
So speak has a sense of authority or expertise, like someone speaking from a podium or giving a lecture.
Exactly. Talk is more informal, suggesting a conversational back and forth exchange, like chatting with friends or having a casual discussion.
So talk is more everyday conversation, like what we're doing right now.
Precisely. And that distinction can be seen in other ways, too. You might speak a foreign language fluently, indicating a high level of proficiency, but you might just talk about a topic casually, implying a more general understanding.
Okay, I'm starting to see the difference. Speak is more formal and often implies a higher level of skill or knowledge.
Exactly. It's all about those subtle shades of meaning.
All right, on to the next verb pair. How about see, watch, and look?
These 3 can be tricky because they all involve using our eyes, but they have distinct meanings when it comes to how we perceive the world.
Okay, so how do we know when to use which one?
Think of see as the most general one. It simply means to register something with your eyes. It can be unintentional, like when you see a bird fly by while you're walking.
See is like passive observation. You're not necessarily focusing on anything specific, just taking in whatever happens to be in your field of vision.
Right. But when you watch something, you're deliberately paying attention to it, focusing on what's happening, like watching a movie or watching a game.
Watch is more active, more intentional. You're choosing to engage with what you're seeing.
Exactly. And then there's look, which involves directing your gaze towards something specific, like looking at a painting or looking for your keys.
Look is all about purpose. You have a reason for looking, you're searching for something, or trying to get a better view of something.
Precisely. And it's fascinating how these three verbs, see, watch, and look, reflect different levels of engagement with our surroundings.
It's like they highlight the active role we play in shaping our own perceptions. What we choose to focus on, what we choose to ignore it, all shapes how we experience the world.
Absolutely. Our perception is not just passive reception. It's an active process of selection and interpretation.
Okay, on to the next verb pair. Learn and teach. These seem pretty straightforward, but I bet there's more to them than meets the eye.
You're right. They're often seen as opposites, but I think it's important to see how they're interconnected.
I like that. So learn is about acquiring knowledge, taking in new information, expanding your understanding of the world.
Exactly. It's a lifelong process of growth and discovery.
And teach is about sharing your knowledge with others, guiding them on their own learning journeys.
Precisely. And it's amazing how these two processes often go hand in hand. When you teach something, you often find that you learn it even better yourself.
Oh, absolutely. Having to explain something to someone else forces you to really think it through, to clarify your own understanding. It's like the saying goes, when one teaches, one learns twice.
So true. And it highlights the beautiful synergy between learning and teaching. They fuel each other, creating a cycle of knowledge sharing and growth.
All right, on to the next pair. Rise and arouse. I always get these two confused. They both seem to have something to do with upward movement.
You're right, they do. But rise is primarily about physical movement, something literally going up, like the sun rises in the east or the smoke rose from the chimney.
Rise is about things ascending, becoming higher or more elevated.
Exactly. While arouse is about stirring emotions, feelings, or sensations. It's about awakening something that was previously dormant or inactive.
So like the speaker's words aroused a sense of hope in the audience.
Perfect example. Arouse is about triggering a response, creating a shift in energy or emotion.
Okay, so rise is about things going up, and arouse is about feelings or sensations being stimulated or intensified.
You got it. And that distinction can really make a difference in the tone and impact of your writing.
All right, we're down to the last two verb pairs. Let's finish strong. What's next?
How about we tackle advice and advise? They sound almost identical, but one is a noun and one is a verb.
Ah, yes, the classic noun versus verb dilemma. I know the online lesson touched on this, but I always need a refresher.
Well, the key is to remember that advice is the actual information or guidance being given. It's something tangible, something you can offer or receive.
So like, I always appreciate my grandmother's advice, or he gave me some excellent financial advice.
Exactly. Advice is the noun, the thing itself.
And advise is the verb, the action of giving that advice.
Precisely. So you might say, the doctor advised me to get more rest, or I would advise you to be cautious in this situation.
Okay, that makes sense. Advice is the what, and advise is the how. It's like advice is the gift, and advise is the act of giving the gift.
I like that analogy. It really captures the difference.
All right, one last pair to conquer. Bring it on.
Let's finish with a pair that often comes up in questions of permission. Can and may.
Oh, yes, the classic can versus may debate. I remember learning about this in elementary school, but I'm not sure I ever fully grasped the distinction.
Well, the traditional rule is that may is more polite than can when asking for permission. But there's also a subtle difference in meaning.
Okay, I'm all ears. Let's break it down.
Can is about ability or possibility. It's about whether something is physically or logically possible.
So can is about what's within the realm of capability, like can you lift that heavy box? Or it can rain tomorrow.
Exactly. While may is about permission or likelihood, it's about whether something is allowed or whether it's likely to happen.
So may is about getting the green light or making a prediction, like, may I leave early today? or it may snow this weekend.
Precisely. And while can and may are often used interchangeably in casual conversation, it's still important to be aware of the distinction, especially in formal settings.
So when in doubt, it's probably best to err on the side of using may if you want to be extra polite or emphasize the request for permission.
Exactly. It shows that you're respecting the other person's authority and following proper etiquette.
Well, we've reached the end of our verb voyage. We've explored 21 confusing English verb pairs, dissecting their meanings, uncovering their nuances, and hopefully dispelling some common misconceptions along the way.
It's been a fascinating journey, and I hope our listeners feel more confident in their ability to use these verbs correctly and effectively.
Absolutely. Remember, language is a powerful tool, and the more we understand its intricacies, the better we can wield it to express ourselves clearly and persuasively.
Well said. So keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep playing with the amazing power of words.
And if you enjoyed this deep dive into the world of confusing English verbs, let us know. We'd love to hear your thoughts and suggestions for future episodes. Until next time, happy writing and happy speaking.